This is Dundee 2013 for Paul 242. Do minority groups need special rights to ensure equality?
Research design. Wait. uh, Do people who believe minorities need special rights also have positive feelings towards certain groups? The data set used was the Canadian election study of 2011 to determine the extent Canadian attitudes towards minorities reflect their opinion on whether they need special rights. The Canadian Charter guarantees all groups equality under Section 15, and Section 15.2 guarantees affirmative action to ensure that disadvantaged groups are granted equal protection and equal benefit from the law.
The rationale behind this is that the research question is considered alongside the legislative basis to create equality and the question of attitudes becoming more accepting and in line with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Dasco argues that the changing values after the 1950s led to a change in attitudes towards minority groups, such as Aboriginals, racial and ethnic minorities, and gays, who were also fighting for social justice, recognition, and inclusion in society. Brutus et al. Argue that Canada has become more collectivist in attitudes in comparison to the US, and thus may be more accepting and tolerant.
The alpha is over 0.6, meaning that the indicators are related enough to combine into an index.
The dependent variables, the frequency distribution shows that the majority of responses were in disagree and strongly disagree. And due to the
Those who believe minority groups should have special rights would also have positive feelings towards each of the other groups. Dupas et al. Argue that some Canadian political parties believe that Aboriginals should be put on the same footing as other people. The authors argue that greater integration into the Canadian society and ending discrimination against them. Smith argues that the Charter allowed greater equality for not only gays and lesbians, but also other minority groups. This indicates that legislative efforts have been inclusive towards different groups. Engelhardt and Welzel argue that economically advanced post-industrial societies tend to be more accepting of minority groups. Since Canada generally has a higher standard of living, there is reason to argue that we would all fall into this category. Kelly raises questions about alternatives to public policy in changing attitudes. The raising of awareness about cultural diversity may be a stronger way to change attitudes. This questions the extent that the Canadian Charter covers minorities.
Looking at the correlation matrix, it shows that due to the probability being greater than 0.01, the likelihood of these results happening due to chance is great. However, the results do show that if you are positive towards one minority group, you're generally positive towards others.
The significance is too high, therefore the results are likely due to sampling error.
Looking at these observed patterns, the results are different than the expectations highlighted in the hypothesis. However, these results still generate useful information. They show that people have different feelings towards different groups, and thus the question of equality is a more complex issue than originally thought. The basis of some of the authors pointed towards a more inclusive and overall equality being reached. However, on the other hand, the results show that although there are positive feelings towards minority groups, but they do not agree with granting special rights. This alludes to a sense that many believe there should be greater assimilation into mainstream society by minority groups. However, another factor that may have influenced this outcome is how some Canadians may believe equality for minority groups has already been achieved through the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Directions for future research. Future research could focus on the individual groups and their ability to assimilate into mainstream society. The very topic of assimilation also assumes that one way of life is preferable to another. This argument may be converse to the Canadian national value of multiculturalism. Since Canadians tend to like minority groups but do not want to give them special rights, may see them on the same footing. This is alluded to in Dupas et al. Being manifested in political parties who aim to represent the electorate.